Chapter 6, Pet Day. All the kids in Mrs. Jewell's class brought a pet to school. The room was very noisy. Dogs barked, cats meowed, a frog croaked, a pig squealed, a cow mooed, birds tweeted. Mrs. Jewell's held up 2 fingers. All the animals became quiet. Stephen didn't have a pet, so he brought an orange. He kept it in a cage on his desk so it couldn't escape. Todd brought Ralphie, his baby brother. Todd, said Mrs. Jewell's. Todd barked. You cannot have a pet human, said Mrs. Jewell's. He doesn't bite, Todd assured her. Joy told Todd to sit and be quiet. Mrs. Jewell's got a large piece of poster board from the supply closet. Let's make a chart, she said. Across the top of her chart, she wrote name of kid, kind of pet, name of pet. She started with Dee Dee. She wrote Dee Dee under name of kid, and you have a dog, she said. Cat, said Dee Dee. Cat, asked Mrs. Jewell's. Dee Dee nodded as she petted her dog. Mrs. Jewell's moved to Ron. Ron, I see you have a cat. Dog, said Ron as he stroked the cat on his lap. Mrs. Jewell shrugged. Okay, she said. He's my dog, said DJ. Ron has your dog, asked Mrs. Jewell's. Ron has a cat, said DJ. That's what I thought, said Mrs. Jewell's, but what? What's a dog, said Jenny. Mrs. Jewell's covered her ears and shook her head. Let's start all over again, said Mrs. Jewell's. She got a new piece of poster board from the supply closet. Mac, what's your dog's name? What's my dog's name, said Jenny. I'm not talking to you, Jenny. I'm talking to Mac. He can't talk, said Mac. Who can't talk, asked Mrs. Jewell's. Mac, said Mac. Billy barked at Mac. Mac barked at Billy. Todd barked at both of them. Joy made Todd lie down by her feet. Mrs. Jewell's moved on. What's your pet, Marin? She asked. Your pet's a turtle, said Sherry. What? Asked Mrs. Jewell's. What is Jenny's pet? Said Sherry. Jenny's pet is a dog, said Mrs. Jewell's. What's his name, Jenny? Jenny nodded. Her dog sat up straight and tall and seemed to smile at Mrs. Jewell's. He's handsome, said Mrs. Jewell's. My mouse is handsome, said Benjamin. Benjamin had a little white mouse in a cage on his desk. If you like mice, said Dana, making a face. Mrs. Jewell's likes mice, said Kelvin. She eats them. Gross, said Dana. He won't come when you call him, said Kathy. He doesn't know his name. Billy meowed. Will Mrs. Jewell's eat yogurt? Asked John. No way, said Kelvin. I will too, said Mrs. Jewell's. I like yogurt. I like strawberry best. Marisha beamed. Mrs. Jewell's likes strawberry best, she bragged. You shouldn't pick favorites, complained Dana. Do you like crackers, Mrs. Jewell's? Asked Rondi. Don't worry, said Calvin. Mrs. Jewell's won't eat crackers. How do you know what I'll eat, Calvin? Asked Mrs. Jewell's a little annoyed. I like eating crackers with cheese on top. Oh, gross, said Myron. He won't come when you call him, Kathy said again. Mac, keep Mac away from my socks, shouted Allison. Wait, said Jason. Now you've got my socks and I've got your socks. I can tell the difference between my socks and your socks, Jason, said Allison. Mrs. Jewell's covered her ears and shook her head. She moved on. What's your pet, Damien? She asked. I already told you he was a turtle, said Sherry. I wasn't talking to you, Sherry, said Mrs. Jewell's. I was talking to Damien. Your nose a ferret, said Damien. My nose a ferret? Asked Mrs. Jewell's. My nose a hamster, said Joe. Billy bleated. Mrs. Jewell's licked her leg. Hey, Paul, said Leslie. I like your pigtails. Thanks, said Paul. May I touch your pajamas? Go ahead, said Bebe, who was already petting Leslie's pajamas. She won't scratch you. This is crazy, shouted Terrence. He's cute, said Dana. So here we have the chart. Name of kid, kind of pet, name of pet. So this is crazy how this all went together. So let's point some funny ones out. So Dee Dee had a dog named Cat. Ron had a cat named Dog. DJ's dog was named Okay. Jenny's dog was named What? Mac's dog was named Mac. Joy's dog was named Todd. Sherry's turtle was named Your Pet. Benjamin Mouse, Handsome. Kelvin Cat, Mrs. Jewell's. Kathy a skunk, Gross. John a frog, Yogurt. Marisha a cat, Strawberry. Rondi bird, Crackers. Myron has a chipmunk named Cheese. Ellison a cat named Socks. Jason a cat named Socks. Damien a ferret named Your No. Joe, a hamster, Mino. Paul, pig, Tails. Leslie, cat, Pajamas. Terrence has a dog named Crazy. Eric Fry has a kid, a goat, named Billy. Eric Bacon, a dog named Billy. Eric Ovens, a cat named Billy. Dana, a dog named Pugsy. Bebe, a bird, Picasso. Todd has a kid, human, named Ralphie. And Steven has an orange named Fido. I'm thinking some of these kids might have gotten caught up with the psychiatrist, with Mr. Pickle, and he might have played some jokes on them, because this is pretty crazy, even for Sideways School, or Wayside School. We know they're crazy there, huh? All right. Chapter 7, A Bad Word. Early in the morning, a white limousine drove up to Wayside School. Just like always, the chauffeur got out of the car, then opened the passenger door. Just like always. Mr. Kidswatter stepped out of the car. "Thank you, James," he said. "My name is David," said the chauffeur. Just like always. Mr. Kidswatter entered the school building. "Good morning, Mr. Kidswatter," said Mrs. Day, the school secretary. She handed him a cup of hot coffee. Just like always. "Thank you, Miss Knight," said Mr. Kidswatter. He walked into his office, except his office door was closed. He smashed into it, spilling coffee all over his green suit. "Who closed my door?" he demanded. "Why didn't you just open it?" asked Mrs. Day. "It's always open in the morning," said Mr. Kidswatter. "How was I supposed to know it was closed this time?" Up on the 30th story, Mrs. Jules took roll. Todd was absent. "Oh, dear, I hope Todd is all right," said Mrs. Jules. "Todd's never all right," said Joy. She and Marisha laughed. Damien looked at Mrs. Jules. Ever since he returned to Wayside School, he thought there was something different about her, but he still couldn't figure out what it was. Mr. Kidswatter's voice came over the PA system. "Good morning, boys and girls." There was the usual pause. "Today I want to talk about doors," said Mr. Kidswatter. "This should be interesting," said Mrs. Jules. "Do you know how many doors there are in this school building?" asked Mr. Kidswatter. Mrs. Jules shook her head. "Well, there are a lot, over 30, and some of you probably have doors at home too, maybe more than one. All those doors. Think about it." "Well, Mr. Kidswatter has certainly given us something to think about this morning," said Mrs. Jules. "So remember," said Mr. Kidswatter, "and please be careful. Always check to see if a door is open before going through it. And if it's not open it. If you can't open it yourself, ask someone to open it for you. This may not make a lot of sense to you now, but someday you'll thank me." Mrs. Jules looked around the class. "That's good advice," she said. "I think most of you already knew it, but at least it's nice to know we have a principal who cares." "I hate doors," shouted Mr. Kidswatter. "It's a dumb word. Door, door, door. Who made up that word anyway?" Mrs. Jules waited a little longer, but Mr. Kidswatter seemed to be finished. "Some people just don't like doors," she said. "I have made a new rule," declared Mr. Kidswatter. "You may no longer say that word. You know what word I mean, but don't say it. Instead, I have made up a new word for you. Guzak. Open the Guzak. Shut the Guzak. Lock the Guzak. Don't you think that's a better word? I do. From now on, that other word is a bad word. I have made my decision." Everyone turned around and looked at the Guzak. Suddenly it opened. Todd entered. "I'm sorry I'm late," he said. "That's okay," said Mrs. Jules. "I'm just glad you're not sick or hurt." "My dad locked his keys in the car," Todd explained. "We had to use a coat hanger to unlock the door." Everyone gasped. Mrs. Jules made Todd write his name on the blackboard under the word discipline.